Take a look at just about any moment in film history when you had innovative approaches to motion pictures. All of it came out of a group of people watching movies and talking about them. These are all people who came out of a film culture that was fairly well developed. And if you want that investment in filmmaking, if you want to partake in that power of cinema, either as a consumer or producer, then a film culture is absolutely central to develop that power. Why are we having this podcast? Why are we doing this? Because you have an audience that's interested in this topic. That means that they are craving this kind of culture.
Hi, I'm Lafan and welcome to the Ajyal Show Season 2. Films are more than just stories on a screen. They are reflections of our human experience. In this episode, we're diving deeper into the films themselves, exploring the ripples that they create in our societies and how that expands the way that we think. Joining us today is a renowned film scholar and an educator in Northwestern University with a career and passion devoted to studying cinema as a cultural phenomenon. He'll share his insights into how films both influence and are influenced by human thought. So without further ado, help me in welcoming Professor Scott Kiertz to the show. Hi, Scott. How you doing?
Hi, Lafan.
How you doing? How you feeling?
I'm okay. It's fun.
It's an honor to have you here.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for taking the time.
No, of course. I mean, the time that you're going to be giving us is really going to be the highlight. I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and where it started.
My story? You mean how I got into film?
Yeah.
Yeah? Let's see. Well, I didn't expect to get into film. I grew up in a small town in rural eastern Oregon. Maybe 2,000 people if you count some of the cows, right? And so it was very small, and I was very different than the rest of my schoolmates. And all my life, I wanted to be a scientist since the time I could learn how to read, right? And so that's what I prepared myself for. All the classes, I love science classes. I went to high school, took science classes. Now again, remember, rural Eastern Oregon. So, not great. And then I go to college, and I'm set on becoming a scientist. And I take courses in organic chemistry and calculus, and I fail miserably. I didn't know what was going on. I was not prepared. Imagine that my education, rural Eastern Oregon, did not prepare me for calculus and organic chemistry. And so I didn't do well. But more than that, I just didn't like it, which surprised me. A crisis of identity. So I got, very poor marks that first quarter. And I took an English class my second quarter. And that was the only film class on campus. Now, I'd always loved movies, but I didn't, think of them that way. But I took that film class, and I was a first-year student in with a bunch of sophomores, juniors, seniors, and I was cooking. And I knew the answer. I could do that class. And I remember that's the first time I saw Citizen Kane, first time I saw a number of really great movies. And I was just, wow. Here's the funny thing. I didn't really like those movies that much, but I really liked talking about them. I really liked thinking about them. And I really liked thinking about the relationship between what we see and the ideas that the film's trying to convey. In other words, the form of the film, the cinematic technique. So I really loved that, and I really got into it. And I asked the teacher, where can I take more of these classes? And she said, well, you're at the wrong university for that. Because it was like the state the science school, right? So I transferred, and I took film classes, and I thought I wanted to be a filmmaker, and that failed miserably. And then one day, when I was a junior in college, I was taking a film class with my favorite film professor, and I looked at him, And it occurred to me that he might be making money doing this. That this might be, is he making a living here? Right?
Right.
And so it was just like an epiphany. Like, so I run up to him. I mean, I go to his office hours and I say, how do you, is this a job? You get paid for this. How do you get this job? And he tells me, well, you have to go to school for a very long time. And I say, you mean stay in school? Well, sign me up.
Right.
And there you go. That's what I did.
Wow. And was there like a particular, like, you know, you mentioned the English class.
Yeah.
Was there like an aha moment? Like, was there like a particular film that you watched and like you guys discussed something and you're like, yes.
Oh, gosh, I can't, that was a long time ago. For me, the entire class was an aha moment. But I do remember the professor asking something about Citizen Kane and me having an epiphany at that moment, or a realization that the movie was about something larger than what it seemed to have been at the first time I saw it, right? And it's not as if I knew exactly what it was. But this is the thing that drove me towards this, is that I saw a number of films along the way, and each time I was not quite sure what about the film was interesting. I just knew that it was, right? That it was larger than me. That you go to a film and you leave going, wow, I think I've just had an aesthetic experience, right? Have you had this?
Yeah.
Right? Where you leave the theater feeling small and feeling like you've just been humbled against something big, something bigger than you, bigger than even the director, something that is art, right? And that feeling is what I got when I watched films. And since then, that's the feeling that I chase, you might say.
Right. And then what was that transition like from being someone who was kind of like analyzing those films to finish a class, right? Versus actually getting to the point where now you are trying to convey those same things in an educational...
That was like falling off a log. It was easy. It was easy. Because once you are interested in a topic, right, and once you explore it and get to know it, then teaching is only simply conveying your enthusiasm for that subject, right? That's all it is. It's just about being there. And, this is what I learned from my students. This is a great thing about being in college, teaching, is that you learn something new every day. And so the great thing is that new thing that I learn every day, I bring into the classroom and think, look what I just learned, right? And I mean, not like that, but in a sense, that's what I do. I just convey my enthusiasm for something I just learned. And that's not just what I learned, but also what I just figured out, right? And this is the other thing that's nice about teaching, is that you learn from the students every day too, right? So that when I go into class and I say, what do you guys think about this? What did you see? They come back with something that I hadn't thought of, and that's cool too. And that's part of the learning process. So there's no transition really from being excited about a topic and learning about a topic and teaching it. It's just about conveying that same thing.
Did you find, just curiously, any similarities between the science that you were so passionate about growing up and then film that you ended up falling in love with later on?
It's funny that you should ask that. It's an autobiographical question I've asked myself. I think maybe the process of analysis, right? Right? Chemical analysis, or taking things apart and putting them back together. Maybe. But what has really satisfied my autobiographical need, right? All projects seem to be autobiographical, is that I've developed an interest over the years in scientific cinema. in films made for the scientific community, or the films that this, or the way that the scientific community, way scientists use moving images in their research to document phenomena, for example. It's a very interesting topic, very niche. We don't have to go into it, but it's one of my passions, and it turns out that that kind of satisfies that childhood need to be a scientist.
You know, sometimes people love film because it has like human emotions, connections, things that maybe to the normal eye look subjective, right?
Yeah.
So when you come and talk about film theory, I'd love if you can tell me how you can kind of have that like perfect amalgamation of the scientific maybe analysis, but also using that to maybe describe the subjective in some way.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that motion pictures are purposeful, right? Someone has thought through why the use of this set of colors helps express the set of emotions, right? And even if they didn't think it through, even if they didn't actually select that pattern exists in the film. And it helps explain this relationship between these characters, right? And so what I'm doing is simply reverse engineering, in a way. I'm simply thinking about motion pictures as a machine that we take apart and we see how it works, and then appreciate that these parts fit so well together.
So what do you think is like the main difference between making a film and then studying film theory?
A lot of people ask me that. And a lot of people ask me, a lot of students ask me, why don't you make movies, right? And I don't like making movies. It's just not the thing that I'm built for. I don't work well with others, as you can obviously tell, right? And you know, when you're on a film set, it's all cables and donuts and all that, and you know, that's not exactly my my thing. I'm far too persnickety, right? So my work is more solitary than filmmaking. So first of all, right, filmmaking is collaborative. Filmmaking is about teamwork. Filmmaking is about leadership, right? Filmmaking is about tinkering sometimes. It's about problem solving, all right? And I like problem solving as much as the next person, but my interest is much more solitary, right? Can I tell you a story?
Yeah, please.
A parable?
Yeah.
It's a story I tell to explain why I don't do this. I want you to imagine yourself at a lake, all right? And on that, you're at the shore of the lake, and on that shore there are pebbles along the lake, and those there's thousands of different pebbles, and each one you pick it up is a beauty to behold, right? Each one is completely different than the next, right? And those pebbles they've got weight, they've got great feel, and they're just gorgeous, right? You take a pebble, and then you throw it into the lake, into the pond, right? And it creates waves as it sinks to the bottom, never to be seen again, right? There are some people who are interested in making pebbles, in making the pebbles, right? I'm more interested in thinking about the waves, in recreating that experience of capturing that ephemeral moment when the pebble hits the lake, right? What happens when that pebble hits the lake that ripples out and disappears? It takes a different set of skills to recreate or to investigate that wave than it does to create a pebble.
Do you think it's important, right, for a person to have kind of like a balance of both, where you take a hand at making a film, but you also need to know a certain level of film theory to understand how to apply those ripples, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, in the sense that there's I think knowing the difference between those things is helpful, right? So that you know what you are best suited for, right? What I'm talking about, there are two different skill sets, one of a filmmaker and one of a film historian. Those are two different things. But on the other hand, any filmmaker should know film history very well. Why? Not necessarily so that they can go recreate waves, because that is a very challenging skill set indeed, but instead to be able to recognize the range of possibilities that a filmmaker has, right? You want to know your palette, right? You know what I mean by that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The painter's palette, right? And so you want to be able to know what possibilities are out there for your aesthetic choices that you're going to make as a filmmaker.
So what are some of those ripples that I think you've explored through, whether that be teaching, film history? What are some of the ripples that really speak out to you, that you think are really important? These ripples for cultural context or historical context, or
I've written a lot about film history. Animation is one of my big areas. So thinking about the history of, for example, American cartoons. But also right now what I'm interested in is a thing we might call useful animation. Animation made not for entertainment purposes, or not merely for entertainment purposes, but also for advertising or education or persuasion of different sorts, right? So those kinds of animations are ubiquitous. They're everywhere, right? You can barely watch a YouTube video without seeing an animation that helps illustrate a concept, right?
100%.
And so where do those ideas come from? Where does that iconography come from? Where does that those lessons about how to do that, where have those been generated? How far back does that go? What other disciplines were involved in the contribution of this? So there's that. I've also written about sound, I've written about the making of Rear Window. I've written about, lots of different things. But these days I'm mostly interested in animation and also in science and the connections between those two things.
How important do you think it is for somebody to know a historical or cultural context of a particular place based on the film that was made? Whether it's the film was set there or whether a film was screened in a certain place, how does the cultural context of the viewing experience affect that type of ripple?
You mean as a regular viewer,
Yeah.
just watching a movie? How important is it to know the context?
Yeah.
Oh, not very important at all, to tell you the truth. Right? If you're an audience member and you're watching a movie, all you've got is what you've got in front of you, right? Now, you may or may not understand what's in front of you based upon this cultural context, right? Because any given film comes out of this context and speaks to that context. And if you're not part of that, then there are parts you might miss. But on the other hand, films also are self-contained in a way, right? In the sense that they have a set of conventions, a set of ideas, a set of ways of doing things that come from filmmaking. And so you can follow along, right? So I don't know that it's entirely necessary that every audience member be fully versed in the context, but it is important for audience members to know, right, how this film is speaking to them, right? And that comes out of their context, right? So you are able to connect with the film because you've seen films all your life and you know the language of cinema, right? Even if that film is coming out of Shanghai or what have you, right?
So we looked at the general audience member's perspective on historical context. But what about if I put my film historian cap on? How important is it for me to explore those historical, cultural contexts of films being made?
Well, that's your job if you're a film historian, right? That's what you do. That's what I do. My job as a film historian is to make connections between what I see on screen and the larger historical or cultural context. So I was just talking yesterday about a film from 1911 where we could see how the way that the choices that the filmmaker made in terms of the sets, in terms of the editing, and in terms of the representation of women was, expressed a particular moment in the United States in 1911 when they were between two models of femininity, for example, an old Victorian model of femininity and a new, more vivacious, more modern form of femininity known as the new woman back at the day. So you being able to see what that film is doing requires some sort of connections to a larger context, usually.
And for someone who's maybe interested now to go watch the next film and think about it a little bit different, what are some tips that you have for someone who's interested in kind of opening that door of analyzing film?
You can always take my class. But beyond that, I think, what people should do along with watching movies? Read books, Reading is where you are able to make those connections, right? So the nice thing about reading is that no matter what you're reading and no matter when you're reading it, it's there, available for a connection that you're going to make somewhere else, right? So you're reading a book, and it has nothing to do with what you're watching now. That's not the point. What happens is that when you're watching later, when you're watching earlier, another time, you make a connection with something that you've done before. So making connections between context and text, between the film and its culture, requires that you know about history, that you know about literature, that you know about painting, art, all of these things. So you just read widely and experience widely, and the connections will come with time. The only difference between me and my students is 40 years of reading. That's all.
Wow. Is there a film, in your opinion, that kind of sticks with you for its like societal ripple effect?
There are movies that stick with me, right? I have my favorite movies, like Singing in the Rain. I show Singing in the Rain every year, right? Whether I need to or not, right? It's just such a fun film. DDLJ is goofy. It's just so goofy, and I enjoy that film a lot. But there are some films that I watched that had such a powerful effect on me that I'm afraid to watch them again. Do you know what I mean? Because I watch them, sometimes it's not the film or not just the film, it is the moment that you see it, right? It's when it hits you, not just what hits you. And so you watched it at a moment when you were ready for it, right? Maybe you've experienced
100%,
this, right?
100%.
And so I remember those moments when I was really deeply affected by a movie. And I recognized that it was just like that time. And I'm afraid to go back to that movie because I'm afraid that I'll see it and I'll go like, you know?
I can definitely relate to that because I took a film theory class.
Yeah.
And, I was like, I can never watch films the same anymore because I'm looking at all the angles and I'm thinking of all the theories. And how do you maintain that? How do you also, are you able to watch a film maybe for what it is without feeling the need to analyze it?
My students ask me this all the time, and they also, just like you, They come into my class afraid that the process of analysis will ruin movies for them, right? And indeed, some of them say, "You've ruined movies for me." Meaning, however, what they mean by that is what you just said, that they can't unsee some of the things that they know now, right? Now they notice camera movement. Now they now they notice editing patterns. Now they notice soundtracks, which they didn't before, right? You have to ask them, well, now do you no longer enjoy movies? And they still enjoy movies. And me too, right? Yeah, I watch movies. And do I see patterns within them? Absolutely. Probably better than most people do, right? Because it's my job. But that doesn't, diminish my enjoyment of them. In fact, it heightens it. Because when I see patterns, when I see things working together, I get the feeling like, "Whoa, wow, did you see that?" Right? Or when it doesn't happen, I can also say, now I know exactly why that was a bad movie, right?
Right. Have you had an experience where you've maybe analyzed the film and its context, right, at a certain period of time? And let's say there was like a 15-year gap, and then different things are happening in the world. Different people are watching it on different platforms. Has that changed the type of ripple? So the proliferation of technology, do you feel, has maybe changed the way that we view film?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a big question. That's a big question. And I think immediately, yes. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to new technologies, right? It can be, and we can talk about that. But what the first part of your question is talking about what happens when time passes, and does the audience see a film differently than this audience did? Is that that's one of the things you're talking about, right? And the answer to that is clearly yes, right? An audience from 1953 sees the film differently than an audience from 1973 and 2003, right? The great thing about art, we hope, is that it's big enough to accommodate all those different things, all those different stances, all those differences in one's viewing context. And hence, a film like Singing in the Rain can still appeal to students even in 2023, more than 70 years later, right? But the second part of your question is about how technology may have affected our viewing contexts, right? And I think that is a very interesting question that historians are exploring too. Film historians are exploring that too. And we found, as if I did, no, other people have found that that cinema has always been manifold, right? We think about movies as being just the big screen in an auditorium, right? But it's not always like that. 16 millimeter, you know about 16 millimeter, right? Started in 1923, was starting to be a big thing in the 1930s, especially a big thing after World War II. But what did that mean? It meant that you could watch movies at home. You could watch movies in a classroom. You could watch movies at church. You could watch movies at a number of different places. You could pick up your projector and take it with you and watch things. Movies have been portable for a very long time, right? And so films and their contexts, films and their viewing contexts have always been, varied over the past century or so. Now, I will also say that, things like laptops, phones, Netflix, and other delivery systems have amplified, you might say, or magnified this effect in a way that is, I think, universal now rather than simply occasional, right? So I think that's one of the things that's been changed is now we have this expectation of abundance, whereas it wasn't that way when I was growing up, where it was films were more of an event and it was much more of a system of scarcity than abundance.
How do you think that we receive films now, that we live in an age where mainstream, like streaming platforms, not only make films more accessible, but I think they make also films from different areas of the world more accessible.
Yeah.
How do you think that like interaction with films from different cultures also that we maybe didn't have as much access to before has affected the way that we receive
I think that's a great question, and I agree. I think that is fantastic. I think that's one of the great things about this new age of abundance is that it has diversified film language for a generation of people that didn't have that. They have to seek it out, however. This is the thing. If you go by the algorithms and just do what the overlords tell us to do, then we will probably end up in a fairly narrow bandwidth. But we have the option now to see things from anywhere, right? And that is pretty cool and decenters Hollywood in a very significant way. That said, we have to remember that these streaming sites and these services that allow us to do this are not archives, and that those options can be taken away at any moment, right? What you see on Netflix, what you see on Mubi, what you see on Criterion may be there today, but it might not be there tomorrow, right? And the other thing we should remember is that with every new medium technology, the number of titles diminishes slightly. So when we had 35 millimeter, we had lots and lots of movies. When you go to 16 millimeter, you have lots of movies, but fewer than you have of the 35. When you go to video, you have lots of movies, but fewer. When you go to DVD, you have lots of movies, but fewer. Blu-ray, et cetera, right? So what's happened is that the number of circulating titles has diversified, but the range of that diversification is not as great as you might think. For example, it's very difficult to find a consistent set of titles from India in the 1920s, for example, right? Indonesia from 1950s. Things like this, right? You can get a film from Indonesia now that you couldn't get before. Cool, right? But it's not as extensive as you might think.
I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about this idea that you're saying that, we've expanded to some degree, like our film culture and knowledge, I think, by having that like ubiquitous access to film, right? How important do you think it is, or how important do you think cinema culture is in society? Should we be invested in film history?
Well, I think so.
Yeah.
That's a question that you have to ask me, and I say, yeah, of course. But let me try to justify that, right? Because if you're interested in the moving image, if you're interested in this kind of entertainment, right? And most people are, and most people spend a lot of time with the moving image in one form or another, whether it's a YouTube video or TikTok or a Citizen Kane or what have you, right? So people are interested in this, and they want to make movies. And it turns out that a lot of countries are very, very invested in that culture as well, right? They recognize, for lack of a better term, the soft power of cinema culture, right? And so there is this investment in that. And if you want that investment in filmmaking, if you want to partake in that power of cinema, either as a consumer or producer, then a film culture is absolutely central to develop that power. Take a look at just about any moment in film history when you had innovative approaches to motion pictures, right? When you had innovative approaches to film style. Almost all of it came out of a group of people sitting around talking and watching movies, watching movies and talking about them, right? Whether it's France in the 1920s, Soviet Union in the 1920s, French New Wave in the 1950s and 60s, or what have you, right? The Iranian New Wave of the 1980s. These are all people who came out of a film culture that was fairly well developed. And that's absolutely central as a foundation for developing the power of cinema, I think.
And how do you think we can develop kind of cinema culture here in Qatar? What are some steps that we can take, from a personal level to, educational levels?
Well, I'm no policymaker, so I don't want to overstep my bounds. But what Qatar is doing seems to be on the right track, right? The reason we have this here, the Doha Film Institute, is to establish this kind of talking about movies, right? That's what we're doing here. Why are we having this podcast? Why are we doing this? Because you have an audience that's interested in this topic, right? Who is so interested that they'll tune in to me, right? They'll tune into this, right? That means that they are craving this kind of culture, that they are craving this kind of interaction with moving images. And so Doha Film Institute's approach by offering festivals, offering opportunities for these discussions is key for developing this culture. Education as well, right? And so Northwestern and other places, VCU, other places that train filmmakers, but also teach them the palette, the vocabulary, the reasons to make movies, right? That is also key to developing a film culture. So you need your education, you need your training, you need your infrastructure, you need your commitment by the powers that be. And so these things together create the foundation for a thriving film culture and powerful film industry.
I want to dive into a stereotype right here. And, my parents, if I take, for example, if I told them, oh, I want to study film, they tell me, what? You study film? What are you going to do with that? So my question to you is, how do you kind of generate that level of excitement about analyzing film in kind of like a practical way, one to that side, but aside from the practical way, just in general, how do you generate that excitement as an educator?
Yeah, I do get that question. And a lot of my students, I would say, don't make that case to your parents. You don't want to become a film historian like me. There's only like maybe 3 jobs out there. Not that, there's more, but there's not that many. So don't worry about that. But you should take my class or another class like it, right? Because the reason you watch movies and the reason you want to be able to watch movies, and watching movies is harder than it looks, which is why you need to take a class, is because you want to be a good consumer. You want to be able to be literate about what you're watching. You don't want to watch and not know why you're watching or what it is you're watching and how it might affect you, right? And so my students say that I've ruined films for them, right? But what they mean is that they can't unsee what I've shown them. They now can see camera movements, they can see editing patterns, they can hear soundtracks, they notice things in a film that they never noticed before. Is that good or bad? That's got to be good, because now they can see and they can notice and then they can evaluate and they can think critically. And that's the whole point. And so, yeah, you definitely should take this class. You definitely should not become a film historian.
And what would you say is like the biggest added value for a consumer to be very like critically immersed into the films that they watch? So after I find, okay, these are the angles, why is that good for me?
Oh, well, it's not just about the angles. It's about how those angles express a particular idea. So what you find from that analysis, what you find from taking this machine apart and putting it back together and seeing how it works, is a better appreciation for how film works, how the moving image is put together in order to have an emotional effect on you, right? And that way you're not a stooge. You're not just taking the material in and not thinking about it. Instead, you're thinking about it and thinking about this relationship between technique and idea and emotion, right? And that puts you in the same category as someone who is a very, very good reader of the written word and knows how particular rhetorical strategies are working upon your emotions, right? And so it's about literacy, media literacy, if you will.
So on the note of emotional connection, I want to squash some beef, right?
Okay.
So I've talked to a lot of people about film. And one of the things that I see that's super recurring is the fact that a lot of people, they just have hate towards rom-coms. They're like, it's not this cinematic masterpiece, and it's super simple. Like there's no meaning to it. But I'd love to ask for your opinion on that. Why
on
do
rom-coms?
we love? Yeah.
Okay. I love a good rom-com. Let's see. What's one of my favorite rom-coms? Definitely Maybe. Do you know this one?
I do.
I love that one.
It's Ryan
I
Reynolds,
love Definitely Maybe.
Right?
Right? So the question we have to ask ourselves then is, what's this hate about? Right? Is it about gender? Is it about the message that rom-coms are giving? Is it about film bro investment in stylistic flamboyance? These are questions that we have to ask ourselves. But to tell you, my feeling on this is that every genre has its value, right? Every genre is great. I love movies of all sorts and sizes. What I dislike are bad movies of all sorts and sizes, right? So I don't care if it's a Western, or if it's an action film, or if it's a rom-com, or if it's a musical, or if it's a drama or a comedy or what have you. I'll watch it as long as it's good, right? I'll watch bad movies too, because that's how you find out which ones are the bad ones and which ones are the good ones. But what I found is a lot of people have a certain, for lack of a better word, arrogance about their tastes. And I find that that's okay. Taste is nothing but a 1,000 distastes, right? So it's okay. But I'm often thinking that kind of condescending attitude that you've been describing tells me more about the person than about the genre of film, right? When you can't say that this genre flat out is not good, because there's no such thing. Every genre has its good and its bad. Every genre has its extraordinary examples and every genre has its bad part. Of course, 90% of everything is crap, right? And so that goes for everything, even not masterpieces. Masterpieces are the 10% by definition, right? But every genre has its bad examples too.
Wow. Do you think, when someone watches a film and wants to get into kind of filmmaking or is a student in your class, if you were to advise them to ask themselves a question when they first watch a film, the first question they should ask, I'm sure there's many questions they should ask, but if you were to narrow it down to one question.
One question that they ask themselves when they watch a movie? Why are they doing what they are doing? What's this? Why that choice? Okay, here's the thing. When you're watching a movie, in order to watch the movie, you have to watch two things. You have to watch what is happening, like the plot, the action, the story. You have to watch what's happening. But you also have to watch how it's happening, how it's being represented, how it's being depicted, how that story is being depicted. And both of those things are a series of choices. So one question you could ask yourself while you're watching something is, how differently could they do this? What would happen if they did it differently at this moment? And that will help you also understand why they chose that particular thing to do, either in the story or in the choice of camera angle or what have you, right? So always asking yourself why or what differently would they do at this moment. That's the path towards film analysis, you might say.
So what advice would you give for aspiring filmmakers or someone who's interested in studying film?
Those are two different things, right? As we've established with the pebble and the wave. But I think my advice for any young person interested in film would be the same. And that is to be a sponge, to soak up as much as possible, either in watching everything and not being picky about the genre or the time period. Just look anything that people have recommended or that you see on, like the Sight and Sound Top 100 list or whatever. Just watch with an open mind and with the only goal is to soak it up, right? You don't have to like it. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to have an agenda. You just watch, right? But also not just watch, but to read, as I said before, right? You got to be able to soak that up and think about who you are. Because I think, especially for young filmmakers, the struggle is not how to make a movie, it's why to make a movie, right? It's about what grounds them, what story drives them to make a film about it, right? And a lot of young people want to make stories that kind of express or reflect some of the films they've seen. And I would say, just as if I were advising them to be a short story writer, you got to write and you got to film about what you know. And so who are you? And what do you want to say? And what message do you want to give to the world, right? And this will take a long time. So be patient with yourself as you figure that out. That'd be my advice.
Wow. I mean, I'm going to take that. I'm not an aspiring filmmaker, but I love film. I love the ripples. And, it's been really a pleasure having this conversation with you here, Scott. And I'm super excited for everyone to see this and to take as much as they can from it. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.